and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and today I'm doing my top books of 2024. I think there are 41 altogether, so I'll try not to make this too lengthy. The first section is the Gothic novels, thrillers, mysteries, anything in those sorts of genres. My favorite there is Beloved by Toni Morrison. She's an astonishing writer, I suppose. So powerful, and I listened to this as an audiobook, and her voice is really soft and gentle, and the contrast between the two is intriguing. But yeah, I love her books. I've got to do a reread of more of them, I think. But Beloved is still an all-time favorite. Another one I really loved is When Things Get Dark, stories inspired by Shirley Jackson. There are a bunch in here, and they're all so good. And I've only got a couple of short story collections here, I think, because it's rare to have one where I like basically everything, but in this one I like basically everything. It's so much fun, and I've dipped my toes into horror this year a little bit, and there are a lot of things in the genre I don't like, but the sort of more Gothic Shirley Jackson sort of things that are just unsettling, I do like, so that was a lot of fun. The other short story collection that I loved is Human Sacrifices by María Fernanda Ampuero. She is, I want to say, from Ecuador. It's tropical Gothic, and it's so good. It considers the decay and oppression beneath the surface of our humid and hostile world, where those on the margins must pay the price for the comfort and safety of the elite. These 12 stories contemplate the nature of exploitation and abuse, illuminating the realities of those society consumes and leaves behind. It's really good. The other one in that category that I read was The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enríquez, who's from Argentina. I've read two or three of her short story collections now. That she's got another one out that I've got to read. I think it's on hold at my library, because I get most of if it's well known enough, like that one, that I can get it as an audiobook, then I'll get it from the library. So yeah, I don't have that one with me, but it was also really good. I like her books. I think she's got a novel out too. My TBR is not getting any more manageable. Also in Gothlit November, if my books don't completely fall over, which they will at some point, I reread again Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I love this cover. It's so pretty. It is A Detail from the Constant Valley, the Lake District by William Turner, and it's beautiful. Does make me kind of want to go there. This whole book makes me want to go to the Yorkshire area. It's a beautiful book. None of the characters are particularly nice or likable, but they're forces of nature, really, and the writing is wonderful. And the Brontes are always favorites of mine. I think this year is going to be a rereading the Brontes year. I read at the end of 2024, I read The Professor again. I've read all of their books before. And now, just this morning, it's the first today as I'm recording this, I started Agnes Grey, so that'll be fun. I haven't read Anne Bronte's books in like 20 years, so I'll get to that. And then I listened to Oh Caledonia by Elspeth Barker, which was recommended, I think, by Bailey of the Bailey Grind, and it's so good. It's so good. It's one of those books that I wish I'd discovered when I was like in junior high or high school, because I would have loved it then. I mean, I loved it now, but I would have really loved it then, because that's about the age of the girl in the book, and she's very awkward, and she gets on better with animals outdoors and with her books than she does with people. The people around her are not terribly sympathetic to her because she's sort of quirky. And yeah, I enjoyed that one a lot. The other audiobook that I read for Gothlit November that I loved was The Specimen by Jaima Fixsen, who I think is Canadian, but it was set in Scotland, something like that. Anyway, her son dies at the outset, so that's not a spoiler. And she is convinced, he goes missing. She is convinced that a doctor that they saw has killed him to add his heart to his weird collection of medical curiosities, because he has a collection of medical curiosities, and his heart had a particular kind of rare defect that was going to not let him live probably very long. Anyway, but so it's her journey of trying to, in a time when women didn't have much of a say-so and she had no money, find a way to bring this man to some kind of justice. And yeah, it's a really, really good book. It's weird, but it's good. Then I read I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, and I wasn't really sure if this fits into like mystery. It's sort of dystopian, I guess you could say, but it's a beautiful book. It's a disturbing book. But it's about human connection and lack of human connection and loneliness. And so these women are kept in a cage, in a bunker underground. They haven't been out for like well over a decade, I think. And one day, by chance, they escape. And you're never quite sure who's keeping them, why they're keeping them, what's going on. But that's kind of not quite the point of the novel, as much as the exploration of what it means to be human, even in impossible situations, and what it means to be human if you can't connect with other people. So yeah, it was a really beautiful book, and I want to reread it in French. So that's on my list of books to get eventually. Then, try not to have a collapse of books here. I Remember You, A Ghost Story by Yrsa Sigurdardottir. I read, I think, about 3 of her books last year, 2024. This one, though, is one of, I think, 2 of hers, maybe the only one. Maybe there might have been one other one where this happened, but basically, it's very rare I've had to stop reading a book for a while because it was creeping me out too much. This one did. But aside from that, it's really good. Her standalone books are really atmospheric, and why is the light flickering? My whole camera's like reaching the end of its natural life. So it just can't cope with very much anymore, I guess. Anyway, they're really isolated. They're repairing a rundown house, and then they realize they're not alone, and something wants them to leave, or someone, perhaps. And I think there was a suicide, and then there was a kid who'd gone missing years earlier, and nobody knows what happened to the kid. So it might not be for everybody, but yeah, I really love her books a lot. She's got another one coming out this winter, which I've pre-ordered. Very excited. Then I read my first Karin Slaughter books. I'd never read her books before. They're good fun. They're quite violent. There's a lot of violence against women, and this one is no exception. The Good Daughter was the first one I read. And so there is an act of considerable violence at the beginning of the book, nearish the beginning, I think. But most of the rest of the book is dealing with the consequences of that on these young women. And then not so young women as they return to the place of their childhood. And it was really good. It was just what I needed when I needed to binge read a bunch of mystery thriller type books. So I'm glad I discovered her. Then I finally, I don't know why I didn't read this years ago, but I read The Maid by Nita Prose. Oh, there go the books. One moment as I collect myself here. Okay. This is a really quirky little book. It's more cozy mystery than eerie atmospheric mystery or thriller mystery. I think the main character is autistic, which I am as well. And I love her. She's so weird, and it's fantastic. And but also she's very sweet and misunderstood. And just, it's really enjoyable to read. It's very unusual. I've never read like with Karen Slaughter books, I really like her books, but I've read other mystery thrillers and they're definitely a mystery thriller. And so you know, sort of know it fits into that category. With this book, it doesn't neatly fit into existing mystery categories because it's just not quite like anything I've read before, which is fun. One other book that's a bit different as well was A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I'd never read her books before either, and I've read 2 of them so far this year, 2 or 3, 2 definitely. This one and then the retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, and both were very good. The House with Good Bones, though, I think was my favorite because the main character was so sarcastic, which I enjoy sometimes. I would get tired of it if every narrator in every book I ever read was that sarcastic, but it was really fun to read just, you know, every now and again. It's fun. Okay, so that's the genre sort of section. I have too many books. And I read this year, I went on a Virginia Woolf rereading binge. So if 2025 is going to be the year of rereading the Brontes, 2024 was rereading Virginia Woolf. And my 2 all-time favorites of her books are The Waves and To the Lighthouse. I love that cover. It's so pretty. These books are gorgeous. The writing is so beautiful and so moving, and you can be like submerged in her writing. And there's no plot. It's very stream of consciousness. People misuse that term a lot, I think, to mean you just get the character's thoughts. But this is actually stream of consciousness, and so it can get a little confusing if you're not sure what's happening. But if you just sort of roll with it, you move pretty seamlessly between people's thoughts, people's speech, and then narration. And you can move from one person's stream of consciousness into another's as they like pass by through the room, that sort of thing. And then in The Waves, there's even less. Like there's no plot whatsoever. She said, I am writing to a rhythm and not to a plot. And it very much is a rhythm. There's a musicality to it that's just incredible. There are 6 children meeting in a garden close to the sea. That's basically incidental. It follows them as they develop from childhood to maturity. Well, sorta, but it's mostly the experience. I read them anyway, mostly for the experience of being immersed in her writing, because The Waves has even less plot than To the Lighthouse, which has almost no plot. But anyway, they're gorgeous, gorgeous books. One other one that I don't have, I swear I used to have it, I must have lost it in a move or gotten rid of it for some unknown reason at some point, is Ben Sinister by Vladimir Nabokov. Nabokov? Oh well. It is dystopian. It's very 1984, but more literary. I don't know, that sounds kind of obnoxious, but it kind of is. His writing is so beautiful. I love it. It's beautiful a different way from Virginia Woolf, but it's gorgeous as well. And I really want to read more of his books this year, I think. And yeah, I've got to reread that one because I think all of his books, there's the experience of reading them for the first time, which is amazing. But I think all of his books can do well with rereadings because there's just so much there, and he was so thoughtful in his writing. And then I listened to, oh yeah, this is the last book I finished just yesterday, which was This Is Happiness by Neil Williams. He's an Irish author. This was only published a few years ago, I think, and it was recommended to me. And it's some of the most gorgeous writing I think I've read in a while. Like, short of Virginia Woolf and Nabokov, I think it's the most beautiful writing on this list. It's incredible. It's a beautiful book. He has very insightful moments. He is very entertaining turns of phrase sometimes, and they're really funny moments, they're really sad moments, but it's just sort of an ordinary life in Ireland over the course of the period when they were getting new telephone poles, basically. It's that time history when the telephone was a newfangled contraption. And but yes, I'd definitely read it for the writing, because the writing style is stunning. And then I read, The Ode Less Traveled by Stephen Fry. This is a book about poetry, which don't let that put you off, because there's a lot of poetry I don't like, because there's a lot of just crap out there. There's some good stuff out there too, but sometimes it takes some digging to find. But this is like everything that an English class about poetry should be, and for most people usually wasn't. So the first section is on meter. So he starts with how we speak, what meter is in English, different types of meter, and what different types of meters or metrical choices can accomplish in terms of like the feeling that you get. Then he goes into rhyme. The third section is on form, what the point of it is, even, and then different types of form like the ballad and the ode, the villanelle, the sonnet, and so on. And then the fourth section is diction and poetics today, which is a very short little section about more modern, what you might do with poetry. And he's got a bunch of fun little exercises. It's a delightful book. His writing style is so much fun. And he makes it all, like the things that a really bad English teacher in high school could make really boring, he makes just fascinating and delightful. So that's, I think, the second time I've read this, and I will read it again at some point. Okay, then I did a Read Around the World challenge and a Middle East and North Africa challenge. And I didn't quite get all the books from the Middle East that I wanted to read, but I did read a lot of books from around the world. So I read books from 54 countries, which was the most I've ever done in a year, which is a lot. And I finished off Asia, which sounds funny to say it that way. But basically I've read a book from every country in Asia with a couple of cheats. I've got to find a new book from Armenia because I didn't finish that one. Which is of course not to say that I'll never read another book from Asia again, because that's ridiculous, because of course I will. But at least one from every country. There are a few disputed territories like Kashmir that I might find another book from if I can. From some places it's hard to find books available in English in Canada. Sometimes it's easier in French because colonialism, but not always. So yeah, that was a really fun time. So some of the books I read that can fit into the Read Around the World challenge, and basically I include anything that's not Canadian, American, or English. So the first book is Irish, which is The Little Red Chairs by Edna O'Brien. I think I heard about this first from Rachel at Second Thoughts About the Mission, I think. Or I heard about Edna O'Brien from her first, I believe, and this was just a book they had as an audiobook in my library. And my hair's a little falling out of my braid here, it's driving me nuts. Oh well. It's really disturbing, but it's really beautifully written. And I've got The Country Girls on my shelf just over there now, and I really want to read that this year, or listen to it, probably. And I don't know, Ireland produces a lot of incredible authors. They punch above their weight in that arena. There's a woman, an Irish woman, who's just sort of an ordinary person, and another guy who is possibly a war criminal, escaped to Ireland, and their relationship, and it's strange and a bit worrying sometimes, but really intriguing. Another book I listened to was The Confessions of the Lioness by Mia Couto, who is from Mozambique. And it is about women, I think multiple women, but it focuses on one in particular, who might or might not be a lioness, shape-shifting women, which is cool. It does really, that device though is meant to demonstrate the damage that both white supremacy and patriarchy have done to Black women in Africa through colonialism. and the danger it presents still to them, and just the incredible violence and harm that's already been done. It's a really well-written book. Sometimes it's funny, like I can't always tell if it's a book in translation, and I think this one was, because I think he writes in French originally. I can't always tell if it's the translator that's really good, if it's the writer whose language in French is really good and then had a fantastic translator, or what combination of events leads to the writing in English being spectacular. But it was a good book. Then I read The Witch Doctor's Daughter by Katrina Mohad-Douad. She's from Brunei. It was only available as an ebook, and I don't usually like reading ebooks, but it sounded intriguing, and it was. And it was I think she's the only author I could find in Canada in English from Brunei. Brunei? Sorry. It's a little country on one of the islands that's otherwise part of Indonesia. And the environment is, couldn't possibly be more different from the one on the Canadian prairies. But she is a herbalist, and her mother is a witch doctor. And her father's a bit scam artisty. But her mother, feels genuinely that she's spiritually helping people. And then her daughter, the main character of the book, becomes a herbalist in the tradition of somebody in the village that she was born in but no longer lives in, because everybody moves to the city for school and work and so on. So she goes back to this city that she was born in the, do you call it a jungle? Rainforest? I think it's a rainforest, but I'm not entirely sure, because again, the environment that she describes is so incredibly unknown to me. But it was really good. I might read her other one. She's got, what's it called? The Fisherman King, I think? Maybe. The Man Who Spoke Snakish by Andres Kvyark. Apologies. He is from Estonia. And it is a book set in the Estonian forest when it was still wild, prior to the Christianization of the country, when everybody was forced to be settled in towns with churches and convert and so on. And it starts at the beginning of that process and ends when he's basically, I don't think this is really a spoiler, but apologies if it is, when he's sort of the last one left who can speak to the animals. And it's really fun. It's just, that you don't get a lot of books set in pre-Christian Europe, unless you're talking about like the Vikings or something, about which most things are seem to me to be quite Hollywoodized these days. But this one was really intriguing. It was a different point of view that you don't usually think about when you think about Europe, because most of Europe just isn't wild anymore. It's very, very settled. So yeah, that was fun. On a Woman's Madness by Astrid H. Romer. She's from Suriname. She's a black woman from Suriname. And she has been compared to Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. And I don't think the quality of her writing, now this was also in translation from the Dutch, so it could be the translation, but I don't think the quality of the writing is quite as good as either of those two women. But the power of the writing is where I can see the comparison. 1 second. Sorry, I had to close the curtains a little bit because the reflection from the sun was just getting a little too distracting. Anyway, On a Woman's Madness. Yes, so she is living in at that time, still fairly recently decolonized independent country, because it used to be a Dutch colony. It used to be Dutch Guyana. And so they changed their name to Suriname. And she is also bisexual, which is cool. And so she's just, it's hard for her to succeed in any sort of meaningful way in a society where she's a bisexual black woman. And there are a lot of challenges that she's up against, because she just cannot squeeze herself into the boxes that society wants her to fit in or expects her to fit in. She can't. She tries. She can't. And so there are consequences to that. And yeah, it's a really good book. Then I read, and this is from Italy, Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night, a Traveler. Ooh, that was bright. Use this to signal for help or something. It is so weird. The structure of this book is unlike anything I've ever read before. And in a less skilled writer, it would probably be a bit annoying because it's in second person for a while. Actually, I think the whole thing is in second person, which I wouldn't ordinarily like, but he is incredible. And he does such interesting things with the form of the novel that it's intriguing and mesmerizing from beginning to end. I love it. I'll definitely have to read more of his books. Okay. Then I reread. Oh, I'm gonna lose my pile again. I readjust. Okay. Reading Lolita and Tehran, which is by Azar Nafisi. This is a constant favorite. I've read it, I'd say 3 times now. And it was one of these books that the last time I read it was 15, 20 years ago. And so it was nice to know that it holds up, you know, that I still love it pretty well, as much as I did the first time I read it. She was a teacher, a professor before the Revolution of '79. And so it's a memoir, but it's a memoir in books because she was an English professor. And then, of course, after '79, there were all manner of restrictions from what she could wear to what she could teach. And so for a while, lessons were done in secret in her home because they couldn't openly discuss some of these books otherwise, or there would be pretty severe consequences, potentially. She teaches in the US now, I believe, or she's retired, I don't know, but she lives in the US. Because eventually she did have to leave because she just couldn't, like the fictional character in On a Woman's Madness, she couldn't make herself fit into the box that the government there wanted, and she wouldn't, she didn't want to veil. I think she did briefly, reluctantly, only to get a job again, and then left the country altogether. But she teaches Austen, Scott Fitzgerald, Henry James, and Nabokov. And Nabokov is really the only one of those that I like. But the way she talks about books is just so much fun that if you're a bookish person, it's delightful. Then I read, and it's hard to get books from Central Asia in Canada. There aren't a lot of them that you can get here. Most of them are not in English. I expect if I spoke Russian, it would probably be easier, but I don't. But I read The Silent Step by Mukhamet Shayakemetov, which is a memoir of the fascinating, tragic, forgotten story of Kazakh nomads of Central Asia under Stalin's brutal rule. So basically, if you know anything about the forced famine, of Ukrainians under Stalin, it's very similar, except he also, he forced them all to speak Russian. I think that happened in Ukraine too. But he also forced them to stop being nomadic, which worked about as well for them as it did for the indigenous people in North America, because they were herders. They weren't farmers. They didn't know how to farm. And then when they did farm, all of their grain that they managed to produce was taken back to Russia proper, so they starved. Millions died. It's a really, really sad story. But it's a fascinating exploration of this way of life that basically very few people now remember, because they're just not allowed to practice it anymore. And Stalin, man, he did a lot of damage when it came to wiping out cultures. Yeah, not good. I read, on the other side of the Soviet Union, The Unwomanly Face of War, An Oral History of Women in World War II by Svetlana Alexievich from Belarus. And it was fascinating. I would like more histories like that, because most histories focus on not just men, but the powerful men. And everybody else is considered kind of irrelevant, which is weird because everybody else is most of the people. And this focused on stories from everybody from women who fought in the wars, whose stories you almost never hear, to women who were suffering because the war came through where they lived. And there's such a wide variety of experiences, and yeah, it's a fantastic book. Another fantastic book that I was amazed by and was I should have read this earlier, was Orientalism by Edward Said. He was a Palestinian scholar, and this book is a bit academic in that it's not like the easiest, it's not like pop history type reading, but it's so thought-provoking. The New York Times said it was intellectual history on a high order and very exciting, and it is. It is an intellectual history, and it is very, very thought-provoking and disturbing and intriguing, and just it got my attention, and it held it the whole way through. I've got to read more of his books, I think, and I'll probably reread this again because it was so pivotal and has influenced so many other thinkers since then. When was it published? 19 something or other. That doesn't really narrow it down. 1979. Yeah, it is powerful, and it is a bit disturbing because it focuses less on the Near East itself than on Western perceptions of the Near East or West Asia. And those perceptions obviously don't make a habit of being technically accurate. So yeah, or viewing people as, people. Now, why would we want to do that? Okay, the next few books fall under the sort of witchiness, herbalism, tarot categories. I read The Bones Fall in a Spiral. Whoops. Oh, the light is just weird. A Necromantic Primer by Martellus. This was a strange one, but really intriguing. And I'd never read anything like it before. But it goes through what necromancy is. Sorry, my balcony is making weird noises. And how to make it work for you. There are a bunch of exercises, rituals, spells, recipes, etc. It teaches you how to honor and work magically with the dead. Martellus shares the history and power of death magic while also demonstrating its ability to bring comfort and connection. A variety of ways to build a meaningful and safe practice, etc. It is a fascinating book. It's a very well thought out book. Like, it's not a hastily thrown together book. She knows what she's talking about, and she's put a lot of thought into this, and takes a lot of care with it, and I appreciate that. I'll have to reread that at some point. Another book I may reread because it was just so intriguing was, sorry, my books keep threatening to collapse all over the place. Read Like the Devil, The Essential Course in Reading the Marseille Tarot by Camellia Elias. I love the voice that she writes with. She's not messing around. She's got a very distinctive voice. I don't always agree with everything she says, but it's always thought-provoking. And her writing style is such fun that I was probably 20 pages into this book when I got the playing cards one, which I haven't read yet, but I will do. But I want to get better at Marseille first. I've got the Yoav Ben-Dov book, which I'll read, hopefully this year. And yeah, her style is so different from what you find in other books, and so not messing around. It's a lot of fun. Then I read Scottish Myths and Legends by Daniel Allison. So as a work of, let's say, literary fiction, myth retellings, I wouldn't say his literary skill is quite like on the same level of a Stephen Fry or Neil Gaiman, but that's asking a lot. But I still would put this book in the same sort of boat as Norse mythology or some of the ones that Stephen Fry's rewritten about Greek mythology, because I mean, it's kind of the only thing out there that does this, and it is very good. It's so much fun. There's an audiobook as well, I think. And you hardly ever get Celtic myths retold. Like, they just, maybe you do if you live in Scotland or Ireland, I'm not sure. But in Canada, you hear a lot about Greek myths, sort of the Latin, the Roman versions of those Greek myths, and then some things about Norse myths a little bit. But you don't hear much about Scottish or Irish or other Celtic myths. And when you do hear anything Celtic, it's either some weird pan-Celtic English thing that is mostly made up, or it's specifically Irish, which is fine. I like specifically Irish, but it's rare to find specifically Scottish retellings, at least in Canada. So this was a lot of fun. I think he's got another one. He's got an Irish one that I've got, and he's got another one I think coming up next year. I'll have to keep an eye out for that one. And then I read Under the Witching Tree, a folk grimoire of tree lore and practicum by Corin Boyer. This is the first in a trilogy. I have the other two. I've tabbed it up a fair bit. But basically it goes through, I don't know how many trees, 20-ish? Yeah, in the ballpark of 20 trees for different seasons. And their herbal and folkloric magical properties, which is so very much up my alley. What's the next one? Under the Bramble Arch or something like that, I think is the second one, and so I'll read that, I think, at some point in 2025. It does take me a little while to get through because I can't read through them quickly because they're so densely packed with details, and I just want to know everything. So yeah, lots of fun. And then, okay, so then I've got just a sort of not generic, so catch-all, other nonfiction category. So I read Invisible Woman, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Carolyn Criando Perez, which was incredible and eye-opening in a lot of ways, unsurprising in some ways, infuriating in most ways, because the world really isn't designed for women, and sometimes that's outright dangerous. It's not designed for people of color either, which causes other dangers. And there's a bit of discussion where it overlaps, but it focuses mostly on the invisibility of women in the world of data, which I found fascinating, but I'm a data analyst. Good grief. With a library degree, so yeah. Translating Myself and Others by Jhumpa Lahiri was also really fun. She's gone on this fascinating journey of learning Italian as an adult. She speaks English, writes in English, and an Indian language, I can't remember. And, but she learned Italian, started writing in Italian, lived in Rome for a while. Then she started translating other Italian works into English, and then started translating her own Italian work into English. For a while, somebody else translated her Italian work into English, and it's just the most fascinating journey. As somebody who's interested in languages, not very good at languages, but interested, it's the way she's gone about this exploration is captivating, and she writes about it beautifully. So I think this was originally written in Italian, I can't remember, but it's a collection of essays about her experiences with translation. All right, Briefly Perfectly Human. This is a beautiful book. She is a death doula, Alua Arthur. The subtitle is Making an Authentic Life by Getting Real About the End. And it's a really beautiful, gentle book. It talks a bit about, I think, how she ended up as a death doula. She was a bit aimless for a while, or not sure about like her life, what her life work was going to be. But she writes really well, and her ideas are very thought-provoking. And I think just having watched my grandma pass away almost 3 years ago, and then watching my parents get their affairs in order, and the difference between the two. It was incredible to read, and it really is a gift to get everything in order for the other people in your life, because trying to deal with some of these things while grieving is not fun, to say the least. It's incredibly stressful, and it's very helpful and reassuring to people around you to deal with it earlier than later. And it can also be reassuring just to you to know that, you know, things are in order in case there should be some sort of catastrophe that you don't plan for, because it's not always planned. Our Green Heart, I am getting near the end, I promise. By The Soul and Science of Forests by Diane Beresford Kroger. She's Irish, who's lived in Canada for a long time now. And this is a beautiful book that I listened to twice back to back. She's a botanist, biochemist, and poet of the global forest. As the last child in Ireland to receive a druidic education, she's brought an ancient holistic attitude to the science of trees. So it really combines modern botanical science and ecology with a sort of ancient connection to the world of plants on a different sort of relational basis than the capitalist one, which I love. It's a beautiful book. She is very funny and very fun to listen to. Like, if you ever get a chance to listen to her in person, she's hilarious. And she's got more energy than I do, even though she's a fair bit older. But yeah, she's delightful. All right, then I read Earth Democracy, Justice, Sustainability, and Peace by Vandana Shiva, which I don't have at the moment because I loaned it to my dad. But basically, it's very much what it sounds like, in that she explores other ways that we might interact with the natural world and interact with each other economically that might be healthier and more sustainable for us and for the planet. And of course, if it's healthier for the planet, by extension, it's healthier for most of us, except for maybe the billionaires, but really, who cares about them? They'll be fine. Then I read In the Dream House. This is one of the most intriguing memoirs I've ever read. I was going to say the most fun, but it's not really the most fun because it's about domestic violence, which is not super enjoyable in itself. But this is by Carmen Maria Machado. Sorry. And it's the structure of the book that got me. So it is about psychological abuse, but it's written in these little mini, I don't know if you can tell, the lighting in here is so bizarre today. Winter lighting, at least I have light today, because I'm up early enough. So it's got each little section, which can be as little as like half a page, is called Dream House as an exercise in point of view, Dream House as inciting incident, Dream House as folktale taxonomy, Dream House as Meet the Parents, Dream House as Here Comes the Bride, Dream House as Cottage in Washington. So it's got every little chapter is like that, and they're very, very short. And her writing is really good. But it's mostly the structure of the book that was so intriguing, and I'd never read anything quite like it before. I loved it. My stack of books is getting unmanageable, as usual. And I read Winter Solstice, an essay by Nina McLaughlin. This is basically, it's an essay, because it's nonfiction, but it's basically a prose poem about winter and the beauty of winter and the hard things about winter, but, and what does it say in the front here? Smart and lyrical. This book makes you feel alive. She returns to celebrate the winter solstice and delivers a most sensual hymn and harbor for the human ability to feel our way through the darkness towards wise, unexpected connections. This ethereal connection, offers us a candle at night. It's an astonishing gift. It is so beautiful. I'll have to read the summer solstice one as well in the summer. Then I read That Librarian, The Fight Against Book Banning in America by Amanda Jones, and I really would like there to be more Amanda Joneses in the world. She's incredible. She's she's really just an ordinary person that was put in an impossible situation and handled it as well as she could, and is still fighting against book banning. But the vitriol that people have directed at her for daring to include LGBTQ and other diverse, like people of color, books in a library is just mind-boggling. I don't know how people arrive at that conclusion, but she's been accused of all manner of disgusting things that they're spurious allegations, but they're damaging to her reputation and her mental health. And it's just so frustrating. But at least there are people out there like her who are fighting this. Because we cannot all give up and give in to the bonkers religious extremists who want basically a Christian version of Iran, where everything that we have access to read is controlled. No thank you. Kind of along those lines, I listened to a Great Courses lecture series called Thinking About Religion and Violence by Jason C. Bivens, which was really good. It was really, really good. It was very thoughtful and very I want to say radical, but not radical. Like, I don't actually know how to describe it very well and do it justice, but it gave me a lot to think about. It's very wide-ranging in the topics that he covers about a whole variety of world religions. So he doesn't just narrow in on one. He covers a lot of them, including the white supremacist version of evangelicalism in the United States, and the damage that has done and is still doing. And yeah, it was fascinating. I'll have to reread that sometime. And then I read, okay, this is the last one, I promise. The Cambridge Companion to the Brontes, edited by Heather Glenn. I loved this book so much. I think I loved it, well, I definitely loved it even more than the Gothic fiction one, which I also enjoyed. It starts out with essays about them as kids, their poetry, their little imaginary worlds that they created, and then goes into some chapters about their books, and then some chapters about, not specifically their books, but like themes in their books, like their characters, their women's issues, religion, and the Brontë myth. And it is so much fun. If you, the light is just, the sun is not cooperating today. We'll go outside for a walk, at which point it will be nice to have the sun out, but just at this exact moment, anyway, I'll reread this again someday, because it is so much fun for anybody with any interest in the Brontes. And so those were my favorite, I think, 41 books of 2024. I read a lot this year, like more than I've ever read in a year before, I think. So I don't know if I'll read quite that much in 2025, but hopefully I'll find some more excellent books. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.